One of the biggest issues, some of the problems that we're facing in this profession, too many of the wrong people have infiltrated. This has
Okay.
become, excuse my French, but the crap job to some people.
This is America.
I have a dream.
These are animals.
America preaches integration and practices segregation.
Why did you say Mexico?
A rising tide of discontent.
The South will rise again.
I have a dream.
We have contrasting visions about what America is. What America is. America is.
This is America.
We got a couple questions in the comments too that I'll get to in a second. I want to keep going down this lane. So you talked about when you can, when it's okay to in those certain situations. There's a lot there. How do you get trained? Are you trained to, like, if possible, de-escalate? How do you view, like, what's happening? Like, particularly, I'm guessing you've seen some of the footage, like, of the knee on the neck in multiple situations since George Floyd in the riot. Tactically, chokeholds. Oh man, I saw a video today of a cop on top of a woman. Like, if you don't stop resist, I'm gonna choke you out. I'm like, Eric Garner? I'm trying to figure out what's being said. Is like, this is what we do and don't do, and like what's actually happening, and when they're telling, like, when you make the choice to, like, pull the trigger or be like, okay, well, there's three of us here and there's just one of him and he doesn't have it. He's like, he has no weapon, clearly. We can see his hands, so we're going to take him down versus, we'll just kill him. Like, I'm trying to understand that. Like, that's really, I just don't get it.
So, I mean, when you get into talking about force and the use of force, I know you asked me about this earlier, and I could probably get into that later, but we do have something called the use of force time continuum, which is used not only in Michigan, but I believe across the country. But basically that's saying, actually, I have a copy of it. Use of force time continuum. So there's 5 different levels for both citizens and officers. So you have, starting from the bottom to the top, you have inactive resistance, passive resistance, active resistance, active aggression, then deadly force assault. That's on the citizens' standpoint. For us, you have officers' presence / verbal direction, compliance controls, physical controls, intermediate controls, and deadly force. So inactive resistance would be a person who's compliant, and you have, let's say, on our perspective, let's say your inactive resistance for you would be you being compliant. And for me, that'd be topped off or equated with officer presence or just my physical presence. Passive resistance for you would be dead weight, tensing the muscles, ignore my commands, and I combat that with compliance control. So at that point, I'll go from pressure points to wrist locks to arm holds. So basically, whenever you do one thing that fits one category, I fit the next. So when you're actively resisting, you're pushing, shoving, pulling. I use takedowns, strikes, which are physical controls. And if you go to active aggression, punching and kicking, I go to more intermediate weapons such as batons, tasers, OC spray, and deadly force. If you have a weapon, and this is where it gets tricky because people like to use and we've heard it so loosely, I feared for my safety. That's circumstantial. You got to take into consideration, that officer's level of martial arts training, your height and weight and size compared to the subject. I mean, I fought a guy who was like 5 foot, $110 on cocaine, and he tossed me like a rag doll. So if the subject's under the influence of drugs, so I mean, it's all circumstantial at the end of the day.
I've been an instructor, defensive tactics instructor, firearms instructor for years. So my opinion varies slightly. And mine has always been, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. I've been in some battles. I worked on the east side of Detroit for some years. That was the first precinct I worked. And I've literally fought for my life. Guns involved, the whole nine, and all of us walked away okay. Not saying that that's going to happen in every situation, but one of the first things that an officer should always be thinking is preservation of life, your own and everyone else's. I don't take a lot of things personal, meaning, if I'm out there in the street, somebody says something or does something, I don't take I don't take it personal to the point where I feel like I have to get my pound of flesh, if you will, and exact some sort of vengeance on you. I've always looked at it as a game. There's 2 sides to the game. We're on one side and the quote unquote bad guys on the other. And I use the term jokingly that it's not personal. If you run and you get away, hey, you're just faster. If I catch you, I'm going to talk about it. You know, I'm not going to beat you up or anything silly like that. I mean, my joke game is impeccable. So it's never been something where I have to take it personal. I think one of the biggest issues, some of the problems that we're facing in this profession, too many of the wrong people have infiltrated. This has
Yeah.
become, excuse my French, but the crap job to some people. You know, you have somebody who they may have a degree, their career path didn't go the way they wanted, so they say, "I want to just get into policing because anybody can do it." This job is not for anybody. This is the job where you should aspire to be, so that your whole life you prepare for doing it the right way. You know, when I worked in the schools, I'm just happy to see Mike here because you know Mike was he was a great kid and he's a tremendous young man. So just to see that he is somebody of his caliber is in this profession, it gives me hope. You know, I'm getting to the twilight of my career, so knowing that I'm leaving it in the hands of somebody like him, it gives me. I'm encouraged that the young folks who are coming behind him, when he eventually trains guys, they'll be trained the right way. And I'm not just necessarily talking about tactically, but having empathy, having compassion for people. You know, everybody doesn't need to go to jail, so it's we could literally talk about my opinions and my beliefs in law enforcement for the next 10 hours because like I said this is something I love doing. I've been able to help so many people, so many young people, just from the office of being a police officer. And more folks who feel the same way I do, we have to get into it. We see what happens when we don't. We see
So
what we
how do we get more of what you just talked about a few minutes ago when you talked about de-escalation? Because I think that's like, how does that become the norm? You know what I'm saying? What are your thoughts on that? And then we do have a couple questions we need to get to from the comments. Otherwise, it's just disrespectful to have people on here. like,
Absolutely, and like I was saying, it starts from the beginning. It starts from making sure the hiring processes you're looking for the right people, that you're asking the right questions. I don't care how big and how strong you are. Do you have compassion? Do you have empathy? Is it your primary goal to de-escalate a situation? I'm not the smallest guy, but I don't look to fight. I don't like fighting and all of that rolling around and all of that stuff. I don't look to do that. So if I can use the gift of gab to talk somebody out of whatever mind frame they're in. That's the first thing that I'm looking to do. If I haven't made a traffic stop in a long time, I sit behind a desk primarily, but I am responsible for who gets hired by my police department. I sit on our oral board, so I get to interview some of these folks that's coming in. And sometimes if people they don't say the right things, if they don't have the right attitudes in certain questions, I get to tell them no, you can't work here. You don't have the opportunity to police my neighbors. I live in the city that I work. So as I said, de-escalation starts from the beginning. It's not something that's so much you can teach it. I can teach you those skills, but sometimes being empathetic, it's just one of those things where you have to make sure that the people you're bringing into the job, they're doing it for the right reasons. And it's easy to teach. I can teach you quote unquote verbal judo because you're receptive to it. You don't look at yourself as a warrior. You look at yourself as I'm a police officer. I'm not a war. I'm not at war with anybody. I don't like the term when officers call themselves warriors. I'm not at war. I'm a police officer.